Help me. They're selling us. She didn't walk through that door. She exploded through it barefoot, bleeding wrists, bruised black eyes, wild with the kind of terror that doesn't perform itself. It performs you. 40 bikers, 40 men the world had written off as dangerous. Every single one of them stopped breathing at the same second. Not because they were afraid of her, because every man in that room and his squad in his bones knew exactly what that sentence meant. If this story hits you somewhere real, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The night the storm came to Maricopa County, it didn't announce itself politely. It came the way bad things always come fast without warning, with a kind of violence that feels almost personal. The sky had been holding it in for hours, and then somewhere around 9:45 p.m., it just let go, rain hammering the desert floor, wind bending the saguaros sideways, lightning so close you could smell the electricity burning the air before the sound of the thunder even registered in your chest. Inside the Iron Vulture's MC Clubhouse, which sat 3 miles off the highway on a stretch of cracked asphalt that most GPS systems didn't bother acknowledging, nobody was thinking about the weather. They were thinking about cold beer, loud music, and the fact that Big Tommy had just lost $40 in a pool game he swore was rigged. "You moved the cue ball," Tommy said, pointing at a man named Decker, who was already grinning. "I breathed near the cue ball. That's different." "Your breath moved the cue ball. Same thing." "Tommy, if my breath could move a cue ball, I'd have been playing professional pool since 1987. Laughter. The kind of laughter that fills a room and bounces off wood-paneled walls and mixes with cigarette smoke and country music, in the particular smell of a place that's been lived in hard for a long time. The Iron Vulture's clubhouse smelled like gasoline and leather and something vaguely like home, if home was the kind of place your mother never approved of. There were 41 men in that building. Some were drinking, some were playing cards, some were just sitting the way men who've lived through a lot of life sometimes do, not unhappy, not restless, just present, occupying space, letting the night happen around them. Jack Cole was one of the sitters. I was 60 years old, and he wore it the way a mountain wears weather, not gently but honestly. His hair had gone white sometime in his early 50s, and he'd stopped fighting it. His face was a map of decisions, most of them hard ones, and the lines around his eyes ran deep. He had the kind of stillness that some people mistake for slowness, the kind that actually comes from spending decades learning when to move and when to stay absolutely completely still. The patch on his cut said Reaper. The men in that room called him Jack. He was nursing his second beer of the night, not really listening to the pool table argument, not really reading the worn paperback that sat open in his lap. He was doing what he did most nights, existing in the particular way of a man who has made peace with a certain kind of grief. Not defeated by it, just carrying it. He'd been carrying it for 18 years. I was thinking about that, the weight of it, the way it never got lighter, just more familiar when the front door blew open and the world changed. She came in like the storm itself had thrown her. The door hit the wall with a sound like a gunshot, and every head in the room turned on pure reflex. That's what loud, sudden sounds do to men who've spent time in places where loud, sudden sounds mean something. They don't just look, they calculate. What they saw took a half second to process. A young woman, maybe 20, blonde hair plastered dark and flat against her face from the rain, feet bare on the concrete floor, and not casually bare, not forgot my shoes bare, but the shoes were taken from her bare. Her clothes were wrong in a way that was hard to name immediately. A light blouse that was torn at the shoulder jeans with a knee ripped out, and something around her wrist that made several men in the room straighten up before they even understood why. The marks. Not fresh bruises. The kind that take time. The kind that come from restraints worn too long. She stood in the doorway for 1 second, just one, and her eyes swept the room the way a person's eyes sweep a room when they're deciding between two kinds of danger. The danger behind them. The danger in front of them. Then her legs gave out. Jack was already moving. He crossed the room in the time it took everyone else to register what was happening, and he caught her before she hit the floor. She grabbed his arm with both hands, the grip of someone who has been falling for days. And she looked up at him, and the words came out of her like they'd been clawing at her throat for hours, looking for a way out. "Help me." Her voice was wrecked, raw. "They're selling us." The music was still playing. For about 3 more seconds, it was still playing. Then someone reached over and turned it off, and the silence that followed was the loudest silence Jack Cole had heard in years. 40 men, not one word. Ian. Get her to the back, Jack said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing about Jack, he never needed to be loud to be heard. The room responded immediately. Men shifted, a path opened. A woman didn't exist in their world very often, and one who looked like this, who had come in like this, opened something up in the room that didn't have a clean name, but that every man there recognized. 2 members flanked them. Decker, the one from the pool game, moved to the front windows before Jack even looked at him. On it, Decker said, and the lightness was completely gone from his voice. They got her to the back rooms, a space used mostly for meetings with a table and chairs and a couch shoved against the wall that had seen better decades. Jack eased her onto the couch and someone materialized with a towel and someone else with a glass of water. And the woman, Emily, she told them her name was Emily, held the glass with both hands, and she was shaking so hard the water moved in it. Emily, Jack said. He sat across from her, close enough to be a presence, far enough not to be a threat. You're inside now. Nobody's coming through that door without us knowing. She looked at him like she was testing whether to believe that. How did you find this place? He asked. I ran. She swallowed. I just ran. I saw the lights. How long were you running? She shook her head and her eyes went somewhere else for a moment, somewhere dark. I don't know. I don't know how long. Okay. He didn't push. He'd interrogated people before in other lives, in other places, and he knew the first rule: let them breathe. Let them feel the floor under them before you ask them to walk on it. You're safe right now. That's the only thing that's real right now. She looked at him again, and something in her face, not trust exactly, but the very beginning of it, the seed of it took hold. They're still out there, she whispered. The others. There are 4 more girls. Jack kept his face very still, but behind his eyes something old and buried and furious shifted. Tell me, he said. She didn't get to tell him, because that's when Decker appeared in the doorway, and the look on his face was the specific look of a man who has seen something he doesn't like and is working hard to stay calm about it. Jack, he kept his voice flat, professional. Black SUV, other side of the highway. Been sitting there since before she came in. Didn't notice it at first, figured it was someone waiting out the storm. He paused. It's not waiting out the storm. Jack stood. He looked at Emily. She had gone completely rigid. What kind of SUV? She said. The change in her was immediate and total, like all the exhaustion just evaporated, and what was underneath it was pure adrenaline. Pure animal brain survival. Black, Decker said. Tinted. Government plates, Jack asked. No, private. Emily's hands tightened around the water glass. That's them. The room felt smaller. They followed me, she said, and her voice had changed. It wasn't a victim's voice anymore. It was something harder, something desperate and focused. I thought I lost them in the rain. I thought, hey, Jack's voice cut through cleanly, gently. They don't know you're in here yet. That's our edge. We keep it. He looked at Decker. How many? Can't tell through the tint. At least 2. Jack nodded once. His mind was already moving through the geometry of it, the angles, the approaches, the variables. Old instincts from older years lit back up like they'd never been off. Nobody goes outside, he said. Keep the noise normal. Don't bunch up at the windows. We're just a bar full of guys having a Thursday night. Men dispersed back into position. From the highway, if anyone was watching, nothing would look different. Just warm light through windows. Just the sound of a country song turned back up to exactly the right volume. Emily was staring at Jack. You've done this before, she said. He didn't answer that. Finish your water. The man who walked in 11 minutes later was not what any of them expected. He was tall, clean-shaved, wearing a button-down shirt that was somehow still pressed, despite the rain, the kind of shirt that speaks of a dry-cleaned life, an expense account life, a life lived in climate-controlled spaces. He was maybe 45, 47. He had good teeth and careful eyes, and the practiced ease of a man who is very good at convincing rooms full of strangers that he belongs in them. He smiled at the bartender. Honest smile, warm smile, the kind of smile that made you want to smile back before you even thought about it. Hell of a storm, he said. Yup, said the bartender, whose name was Wes and who had been tending bar for the Iron Vultures for 11 years, and who had a very precise internal gauge for when a person was performing warmth rather than feeling it. The needle on his gauge was buried in the red. "I'm looking for my sister," the man said. He pulled out his phone and showed a photograph Emily smiling somewhere, sunny, somewhere before whatever had happened to her happened. "She called me a few hours ago, said she was out this way. She's been having a hard time lately. Mental health stuff, you know how it is." She goes off, sometimes scares the family half to death. He shook his head. "Sad brother, worried brother." The performance was excellent. "Haven't seen her," Wes said. The man's eyes did a quiet, careful scan of the room. Systematic. Not the eyes of a worried brother, the eyes of a man doing an inventory. "You sure blonde 20-ish? Might have seemed disoriented." "I said I haven't seen her." The man smiled again. Nodded. "Okay, well, if she does come in." He slid a business card across the bar. "I'd really appreciate a call. Family's worried sick." He turned to leave. And that's when it happened. From somewhere in the back of the building, past two closed doors, through a hallway came a sound. Not a scream. Nothing that dramatic. Something worse, actually. A single sharp intake of breath. The sound a person makes when they see something that stops their heart. When their body reacts before their brain has even processed the threat. The sound Emily Dawson made when she heard his voice through the walls. The man at the bar stopped walking. His back was to the room. For 2 full seconds, he stood completely still, and in those 2 seconds, the entire nature of what he was shifted. The warm-eyed businessman dissolved, and what stood there instead was something else. Something that recognized the sound for what it was, as precisely as every biker in the room did. Then he turned back around, and the smile was back. But the eyes were different now. "You know what?" he said pleasantly. "I think I'll wait a few minutes. See if the rain lets up." Nobody moved. "Or," Wes said from behind the bar, in a voice that had dropped about 20 degrees, "you could take the card back." The man looked at Wes for a long moment. Then he looked at the room. 40 men looking back at him. Not moving, not speaking, not threatening, not yet, because Jack hadn't said a word, hadn't made a gesture, hadn't shifted his weight in his chair near the hallway entrance, where he'd quietly positioned himself 6 minutes ago. But the stillness itself was a statement. 40 men who know exactly what they're doing it together, saying nothing. That's not a bar full of guys having a Thursday night. That's something else entirely. The man picked up his card off the bar. "Have a good evening," he said, and he left. The second the door closed, Jack was on his feet. "2 on the back exit," he said quietly. "Somebody check if the SUV moves." He went to the back room. Saw him. Emily was pressed against the far wall. She looked like she'd been electrocuted. Every muscle rigid, eyes wide, and she was breathing in shallow, rapid pulls that Jack recognized as someone fighting their own body's panic response. "That was Marcus," she said before he even spoke. "Marcus. He's not her brother," she said. And then she made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob, the sound of someone who has been so frightened for so long that fear starts taking strange shapes. "He was the one he was there from the beginning. He's the one who runs the—" She stopped, her hands pressed flat against the wall. "He runs everything. He's not some hired guy. He is it." "Okay," Jack said. "He knew I was in here." She looked at him with an expression that was half horror, half something almost like awe. "He stood right there and he knew I was in here, and he just smiled and asked about me like I was a lost dog and—" "Emily." Jack moved toward her slowly, sat down on the edge of the table, eye level. "Look at me." She looked. "He left," Jack said. "You hear me? He came in here to take you back, and he left without you. Means right now in this moment you won." He let that sit, watched her breathing start to slow fractionally. "But I need you to talk to me now." That's because he's going to regroup, and we need to be ahead of it. She nodded. She pressed her mouth tight together and nodded. And when she looked at him again, her eyes were different. They were the eyes of a woman deciding to be something other than afraid. "Okay," she said. "Start from the beginning." 4 days ago, the way she told it was precise. That was the first thing that registered, not the emotion of it, though the emotion was there, threaded through every sentence like wire through a wall. The precision, dates, times, sequences. The specific way a person tells a story when they have been rehearsing it in their head for days, because they know that if they ever get the chance to tell it, every detail might matter. 4 days ago, Emily Dawson had been a sophomore at Arizona State University, a communications major with a part-time job, waiting tables, and a dream of working in broadcast journalism. She'd been contacted 6 weeks earlier through Instagram by what presented itself as a boutique modeling and talent agency. Legitimate-looking website, professional headshots on their page. Real testimonials with real names she tried to verify without knowing quite enough to know what she was actually verifying. The first meeting had been in a public place. Scottsdale, upscale coffee shop. Marcus had been there, calm professional, the expense account smile already on full display. He'd told her they were scouting talent for regional advertising campaigns, that she had exactly the look their clients wanted, that the pay was substantial and the work was clean and professional. She'd been smart about it, she said. She'd told her roommate. She'd told her mother she had an audition. She'd kept her phone charged. None of it mattered. The second meeting had been in a hotel conference room, 3 other young women in the room, which made it feel safer somehow, which she now understood was the point. A fourth woman had left with someone before Emily arrived. A contract on crisp paper with a real-looking letterhead. A handshake. A celebratory drink. She woke up in a room with no windows and zip ties on her wrists. She described the room. She described the guard schedule, what she'd been able to observe through the space under the door. The sounds of the building around her, industrial metallic, the particular acoustics of a warehouse space, the smell of diesel. She described the other girls' voices through the wall. 4 of them. She'd spoken to them all through the shared wall at night, when the guards changed shifts and there was a 20-minute window of inattention. She knew their names, their ages, where they were from. She'd gotten out through a bathroom window that she'd spent 2 days quietly working loose from its frame. She'd run in the rain without shoes because her shoes were in the main room, and the main room had people in it. She'd run across open desert for what she estimated was 40 minutes before she saw the lights of the clubhouse. Jack listened to all of it without interrupting. This was not kindness. This was strategy. He'd learned a long time ago that the moment you interrupt someone telling you something important, you risk breaking the thread they're following back to the thing they need to say. The thing they might not even know is the most important thing until they get there. He didn't interrupt. He waited. And then she said the thing. "There's a cop," she said. The temperature of the room dropped. "What kind of cop?" Jack asked, and his voice was very, very even. "I don't know his rank. I don't know his name." She shook her head. "But Marcus made a call on the second night. I heard it through the door. He wasn't hiding it. He didn't think I could hear. He called someone and he said..." She closed her eyes, retrieving it exactly. "He said she's not on any report. Make sure it stays that way." And then he said a name, and the name had a title. "What title?" "Detective." Jack said nothing. "If I go to the police," Emily said, and she looked at him with the flat, direct clarity of someone who has had 4 days to think through every possible option and has arrived at the end of them. "And Marcus has someone inside who can make a missing persons report disappear then the second I walk into a police station. He knows you're there," Jack said. "Within the hour." The silence was different now. It had weight. It had shape. Jack stood. He walked to the door of the back room and stood in the frame of it, looking out at the bar where his men had drifted back to their positions with the professional ease of people who know how to look casual while being on a specific kind of alert. These men, he looked at them. Big Tommy, who had 3 grandchildren and a Purple Heart he kept in a shoebox and never mentioned. Decker, who had a law degree he'd never used and an ex-wife he still loved. Wes, who had started tending bar for the Vultures as community service in '94 and simply never left. Old Sergeant, who was 67 years old and had the fastest hands of any man Jack had ever known. Young Pete, who was 24 and the newest member, and who was right now sitting very straight in his chair near the front window, pretending to look at his phone, but actually watching the highway. These men who the world looked at and saw danger and called criminal and crossed the street to avoid these men. Jack, Emily's voice was quiet behind him. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression that was trying to ask something. It didn't quite know how to ask whether the place she'd run to was actually what she needed it to be. Whether the gamble of bursting through that door into this room had been a good one. Whether the only people who could help her were 40 men who'd built their lives outside the edges of every system she'd been raised to trust. I thought about his daughter. He thought about a face he hadn't seen in 18 years, a face he could still draw from memory, But that had grown old only in his imagination, that existed now only as a question mark and a weight. He thought about the day he'd understood that somewhere, somehow his daughter had needed someone to show up, and nobody had. You said there are 4 more girls in that warehouse, he said. Yes. And you remember everything you told me. Guard rotations, entry points, the layout, everything, she said. I spent 4 days memorizing it. I thought, her voice faltered, I thought if I ever got out, I wanted to be useful. Jack looked at her. This 20-year-old woman who had been zip-tied in a dark room for 4 days and had spent that time doing reconnaissance. You did good, he said. You did real good. He stepped back into the bar and raised his voice just enough to cut through the noise. Listen up. The room went quiet. Close the bar, lock the front. Nobody calls anyone outside this room until I say different. He paused, looked around at 40 faces looking back at him. We've got a situation. What kind of situation? Tommy asked. Jack glanced back toward the hallway, toward the girl in the back room with the bruised wrists and the precise memory and the 4 names she'd learned through a shared wall. The kind, Jack said, that we don't walk away from. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then old Sergeant pushed back his chair, stood up, and one by one so did everyone else. Old Sergeant was the first one on his feet, and that meant something. In any room, in any organization, in any collection of human beings who have spent enough time together to develop an internal hierarchy that nobody ever wrote down, but everybody understood perfectly. The first person to stand up after a hard thing is said is the one who tells you everything about what the room has already decided. Old Sergeant standing meant the question wasn't whether. It meant the question was how. Jack watched him stand, and something in his chest moved that he didn't have a clean word for. How many at the warehouse? Sergeant asked. Direct, no theater. She's still running numbers, Jack said. Give her 10 minutes. We got 10 minutes. The SUV hasn't moved. That was young Pete from the window, not looking up from his phone. Still sitting, engines probably on, I can see exhaust. They're waiting for backup or waiting for orders, Decker said. Either way, they're not rushing. They think she's trapped. She is trapped, Tommy said. We all are a little bit. No, Jack shook his head. They think she's hiding. There's a difference. Hiding means cornered, means scared, means eventually she comes out or they come in. They don't know what's actually in this room with her. The room absorbed that. Several men glanced at each other with the particular expression of people who have just been reminded of something they'd half forgotten about themselves. So we have a window, Decker said. Small one, Jack said. But yes, I went back to the hallway. At the door of the back room, he stopped because Emily wasn't sitting on the couch anymore. She was standing at the table with a paper napkin and a pen she'd apparently found somewhere, and she was drawing. Not art diagrams. Rough, fast, functional. The shape of a building. Marks that indicated doors. Numbers that indicated something about timing. She didn't look up when Jack came in. Loading dock on the east side, she said. That's the weakest entry. The main door is always locked from the inside with a physical bolt, not electronic physical, which means you can't hack it, but you can breach it. The roll-up door on the north side is only open for deliveries, and the last delivery I heard was the morning of the 2nd day, so I don't know their schedule. Jack looked at the napkin, then he looked at her. I counted footsteps, she said, and now she did look up. Her eyes were clear and steady. The shaking had stopped. 2 guards on rotation inside, one stationed outside the east side, one who walks the perimeter she paused, calculating, I think every 40 minutes, maybe 45. The timing was consistent enough to feel like a rule. And the girls, Jack said, where are they held? Interior rooms, 4 separate rooms along the west corridor. The doors are padlocked from the outside. She tapped the napkin. The padlocks are the same type I saw one up close when they moved me to a different room on day 2. Standard commercial padlock, not hardened steel. Jack pulled out a chair and sat down and looked at the napkin for a long moment. Emily, he said, how do you know all this? She looked at him like the question surprised her. Because I paid attention, she said simply. I knew I was going to get out. I just didn't know when, so I paid attention to everything. The simplicity of it landed in the room like something solid and true. Okay, Jack said. He picked up the napkin. I'm going to show this to my guys. You stay here, and you think about everything else you haven't told me yet, sounds, smells, anything that felt wrong or different. Sometimes the thing that matters most is the thing you think is too small. She nodded. He stood to leave. Mr. Cole, he turned. Those girls, she said, they don't know I got out. They don't know anyone knows where they are. Her voice held steady, but something behind it was working very hard. They're sitting in those rooms right now thinking nobody's coming. Jack held her gaze for a full 3 seconds. Then we better move, he said. The napkin went on the bar counter and 12 men crowded around it, and the education began. Jack walked them through it point by point, relaying Emily's information in the same precise sequence she delivered it, watching his men absorb it, the way men absorb tactical information quietly with the occasional question that cuts to the center of the thing and leaves the edges alone. One outside guard, Sergeant said. That's light. They're not expecting resistance, Decker said. Why would they be? As far as they know, this is a logistics operation. Nobody fights back against a logistics operation. Until tonight, Tommy said. Until tonight, Decker agreed. What's the distance from here? Sergeant asked. She said she ran 40 minutes, Jack fed, barefoot in the rain and shock. Probably 2 miles, maybe 2.5. 20 minutes in trucks. Less if we push it. We're not pushing it, Jack said. We go quiet. We go dark. We arrive like we were never coming. Young Pete raised his hand slightly, the gesture of a man who has something to say and isn't entirely sure it's his place to say it, yet which in this company meant he was still learning, which was fine. What about the SUV outside? He asked, every head turned toward the front of the building. Right, the SUV. Marcus and whoever was in that vehicle were still sitting across the highway watching, waiting. The moment the Vulture's truck started rolling out of that parking lot, the element of surprise at the warehouse evaporated. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone worked through the same geometry. We need to neutralize the SUV before we move, Sergeant said. Neutralize, Tommy repeated slowly. That's a careful word. It's a careful situation. We're not touching anyone in that vehicle, Jack said. Not until they give us a reason. We don't start it. So we keep them busy, Decker said. Make them think everything is still status quo. If they believe she's still inside and not going anywhere, they wait. Give us time to get to the warehouse and back before they figure out the play. Who stays back? Sergeant asked. Jack thought about it. Wes, Tommy, 4 others. You run the bar normal. Music up. Keep the lights the same. If Marcus or anyone from that SUV comes to the door, you slow them down. How long do we need? Pete asked. Jack looked at Sergeant. Sergeant looked at the napkin. 45 minutes if everything goes right, Sergeant said. Plan for 90, Jack said. A pause in the room, not fear. These men had left fear behind at various points in their lives and hadn't fully reunited with it. Something more like gravity, the weight of what was being proposed settling into bones and muscle and decision. We do this right, Jack said, and those girls are home before sunrise. We do this wrong, and he stopped, looked around the room. We don't do it wrong. That's not a version we're running. Nobody argued with that. Gear up, Sergeant said quietly. 15 minutes. The room became purposeful in the way rooms become purposeful when the people in them know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. Organized, focused, efficient in the way that only comes from trusting the people beside you completely. Jack went back to the hallway. He almost ran into Emily, who was standing just outside the back room door, with the expression of someone who has been listening to everything and has made a decision about what that means. I'm going with you, she said. No, Jack said. I know the building, I know the voices, I know the rotations. You've been through 4 days of, I know, she said, and her voice was sharp and clean and left no room for argument. I know what I've been through, I was there, and I am telling you that I am the most useful person you can have with you tonight because I have seen that place from the inside and none of you have. She looked at him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. You'd take a soldier with a map over one without, wouldn't you? Jack looked at her for a long moment. You stay in the truck, he said, unless I specifically tell you different. Deal. And you do exactly what I say exactly when I say it. Deal. And if at any point, Jack, she met his eyes. I'm not fragile, I'm angry. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Get your shoes, he said. Wait, you don't have shoes. Someone in this building wears a size 7. As it turned out, young Pete's girlfriend had left a pair of sneakers in his saddlebag 3 weeks ago and forgotten about them. They were slightly too big, but Emily laced them tight and didn't complain. and was ready in 4 minutes, which was faster than two of the actual members. The trucks went out the back. That was the move. Nobody outside would see the vultures had a back exit that came out on a service road, running parallel to the highway for a quarter-mile before cutting south into open desert. 3 trucks, 12 men plus Emily, headlights off until they hit the service road bend. Wes turned the bar music up 2 notches at exactly the moment the back door closed. From across the highway, nothing changed. Warm windows, loud music. A Thursday night in a biker bar. The SUV didn't move. In the lead truck, Emily sat between Jack and Sargent with the napkin in her hands and her eyes on the darkness outside, and she talked. Quietly, continuously, filling in details as they came back to her, the way the fluorescent light in the main corridor flickered on the left side. The sound of a TV on somewhere in the building, always the same channel. The voice of the guard she'd called Wall in her head because he never moved, just stood against the wall and his boots were heavy, and she'd learned to track him by sound alone. Sargent listened and made small notes on the back of his hand with a pen. Jack drove. He didn't say much. He was in the place he went before things happened, the pre-action quiet where all the noise inside a person goes still, and what's left is the thing underneath it. Purpose, clarity, the particular calm of a man who has decided something completely and has no leftover energy to spend on doubt. I thought about the detective whose name Emily had heard through a door. The single word that had changed the entire nature of the situation. If they did this right, if they went in and pulled those girls out and the traffickers had time to scatter before anyone could identify them, there would be no charges, no courtroom, no discovery process. Marcus and his people would know what happened and who did it, but they'd never be able to say so without explaining what they'd been doing in that warehouse. It was messy. It was imperfect. It left things unresolved in ways that would sit badly. But those 4 girls would be home. That was the math. Jack had never been good at math, but he had always been able to do that one. Jack, Emily's voice. Yeah. What happens after, she asked. To you, to your people. Don't worry about that. I am worrying about that. He glanced at her. We've managed consequences before. These aren't regular consequences. If Marcus has someone inside law enforcement, Emily, his voice was quiet, not dismissive, just certain. You focus on the girls. We'll focus on the rest. She looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable, and he could feel her working through whether to push it further, and then she decided not to, and turned her eyes back to the darkness. Sargent spoke without looking up from the back of his hand. 2 minutes. Jack eased off the gas. 7 p.m. The warehouse was exactly where Emily had said it would be. She'd tracked the direction of their drive on the nights they'd moved her, noted the compass of the stars through a cracked vent. When the building materialized out of the dark ahead, there was a collective exhalation in the truck relief, but not the soft kind, the hard kind, the kind that sharpens everything. One light on the east side, Pete said from the back seat. Single guard. He's not paying attention. He's looking at his phone. He'll hear the engines, someone said. Not yet, Sargent said. We're still far enough. He looked at Jack. We go on foot from here. Jack nodded. He put the truck in park and killed the engine, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of the storm, which had eased from violence to persistence, still raining but steadily, which was good. Rain-covered sound. He turned to Emily. You remember everything you told me? He asked. Everything, she said. Is there anything at all you haven't told me yet? Because right now is the moment. She thought, genuinely thought, he could see her going back through the rooms and the sounds and the patterns. The guard inside, she said. Wall, the one who never moves. He had a radio, old style, not a phone. If he transmits, he won't get the chance, Sargent said from beside her. And she stopped. What? Jack said. One of the girls. The youngest one. Her name is Sophia. She's 17. She's been the quietest of all of them, and I think Emily's voice tightened. I think she's sick or hurt. I don't know which, but her voice on the last night was wrong. The truck was very quiet. Okay, Jack said. We know. He opened his door. The rain hit his face, and he stood in it for a second and breathed and looked at the building ahead. Dark except for that one exterior light and the thin yellow line under what must be the east side loading dock door, and he thought 4 girls. 4 names she learned through a wall. A 17-year-old whose voice had gone wrong. He thought about his daughter. He always thought about his daughter. Then he put the thought away because the thought had done its job. It had told him why, and he already knew why, and from here, All he needed was how. He walked around to Sergeant, and for 30 seconds they spoke in low voices about the sequence. Entry, contact, control, extraction. The words were simple and the plan was simple, and sometimes that's the thing, the simplicity of it. Not elaborate, just effective. The men spread out from the trucks and practiced silence. Emily stepped out of the vehicle. Jack looked at her. I said the truck, he told her. Sophia, she said. Just that, one word. The name of a 17-year-old girl whose voice had gone wrong. Jack looked at her for 3 seconds. Stay behind a sergeant, he said. 3 steps back, at all times. Understood. If I say down, you hit the ground before I finish the word. Understood. And Emily, he held her gaze. Whatever you hear in there, whatever it looks like, you keep moving. We'll deal with everything after they're out. You focus on voices and doors and the sequence. You're our map, not our soldier. Understood. Understood. Something moved across her face, not argument. Something more like acceptance, the kind that costs something. Understood, she said, and they moved. The guard on the east side was named Carlos, though nobody outside the operation knew that, and nobody inside the operation cared. He was 23 years old, and he'd been standing in the rain for 4 hours, and he was absolutely, completely focused on a video on his phone. And he was in the middle of the funniest part when a hand came out of the dark and removed the phone from his grip, and a voice said very quietly in his ear, don't. Just that, one syllable, but delivered with the particular resonance of a man who has said it in situations of genuine consequence and had it work every single time. Carlos didn't. Zip ties from his own jacket pocket, which Sergeant had correctly predicted he'd be carrying. The irony of it was not lost on at least 3 members of the team, none of whom said anything because now was not the time. The radio on Carlos's belt was removed carefully and passed back to Pete, who would monitor it. 22 seconds from approach to control. No sound, no alarm. From somewhere inside the building, the particular quality of silence that's actually not silence, that's controlled breath and held fear. Emily heard it. She heard the girls. She hadn't expected it to hit her that way. She'd spent 4 days building walls in herself, building the analytical distance that had let her function when functioning was survival. She thought she was past the part where her body remembered instead of her mind. But standing 12 feet from the east loading dock door, with rain on her face and the warehouse wall in front of her, she heard a sound from somewhere deep inside that she recognized. A voice, Sophia's voice, murmuring something in Spanish, very low, the kind of voice you use when you're talking to yourself just to prove you still can. Emily's throat closed. Jack's hand came to her shoulder briefly, firmly. Not comforting, anchoring, reminding her of gravity. She breathed. Sergeant had the bolt cutters at the door, and Jack looked back at the line of men behind him, and he looked at Emily, and something passed between them that didn't require language, the acknowledgement of what they were all standing on the edge of and the agreement to step off it anyway. Jack nodded once. Sergeant cut the lock. The door swung open, and it began. The door opened, and the smell hit them first. Not blood, not chemicals, something worse in a way that was harder to name, the smell of people who had been kept. Confined air, recycled fear, the particular staleness of spaces where human beings have been reduced to inventory. Jack had smelled it before in other countries, in other decades, in places that existed in the margins of maps and the gaps between laws. He had hoped never to smell it again. He breathed through it and moved. Sergeant went in first, which was the plan. Jack second. Then 4 others in a sequence they'd agreed on outside, each man knowing his angle, his sector, his job. Emily came in behind Sergeant as instructed, 3 steps back exactly as promised, and she was already orienting herself, turning her head slightly, left, slightly, right, reading the space through memory rather than sight. Wall is ahead and left, she said barely above a breath. 30 feet. He stands at the corridor junction. Sergeant held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Silence. Then footsteps. Heavy ones. The particular rhythm Emily had tracked for 4 days through a locked door. Regular, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who believes completely that nothing is coming. Sergeant looked at Jack. Jack looked at his watch, looked back up, held 2 fingers up, then pointed left. 2 men peeled off silently into the dark. The footsteps kept coming. Then they stopped. A pause, the kind of pause that happens when something registers at the edge of awareness, not clearly enough to name, but enough to make the animal brain say, wait. Hello, the guard's voice. Low, cautious. In Spanish, first then English. Carlos, nothing from Carlos because Carlos was zip-tied to a pipe outside and had made the intelligent decision to stay very quiet. Another pause. 3 seconds. 4. Then the footsteps started again. Faster now, moving toward the exterior, moving toward the east, door moving toward where everything was about to converge. And that's when Sergeant's 2 men came out of the dark on either side, and it was over in 8 seconds with no sound louder than a sharp exhale and a body being lowered carefully to the concrete floor. Clear, someone whispered. The corridor opened up ahead of them. Emily was already moving. She didn't run. She moved with the focused, precise urgency of someone who has been planning this exact moment for 96 hours and is not going to waste a single second of it on anything other than the thing. She counted doors in the dark when 2 turned at the junction without hesitating, 3, 4, and stopped at the first of the west corridor rooms. Here, she breathed. The padlock was exactly what she described. Sergeant had the bolt cutters on it in 3 seconds. The snap of the shackle breaking was the loudest sound they'd made since entering the building, and every person in the corridor went absolutely still for a count of 3, listening for any response from deeper in the building. Nothing. Jack eased the door open. The girl inside, her name was Priya, Emily had told them, 21 years old, pre-med student from Phoenix, was pressed against the far wall with her knees pulled to her chest and her hands raised in front of her face. And the sound she made when the door opened was not a scream. It was the sound of someone who has been waiting so long to be afraid of one more thing that they've run out of fear, and what's left underneath it is something else entirely. Priya, Emily's voice, soft, immediate. The hands came down. The girl's face frozen, stunned, processing broke open. Emily, she said, and the word had more weight than a single word should carry. It had 4 days of weight in it. We're getting you out, Emily said. Right now, can you walk? Yes. Priya was already on her feet, already moving. Yes, I can walk. Stay close, don't make noise. We'll explain everything when we're outside. Jack watched Emily work and understood something about her in that moment that he hadn't fully understood before. She wasn't just the person who had gotten out. She was the person who had always intended to come back. The second room, a young woman named Destiny 19 from Tucson. She looked at the open door for a full 2 seconds before she moved like her body needed extra time to believe it was real. Then she came out fast, grabbed Emily's arm with both hands, and didn't let go. And Emily let her hold on without breaking stride. The third room, a woman named Cara, 23, who didn't make any sound at all. When the door opened, just looked at Sergeant with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who has spent 4 days deciding she was going to survive this and is now doing the math on whether this is actually the way out or just the next danger wearing a different face. She looked at Emily. Emily nodded once. Kara walked out, 3 down, 1 left. Sophia. Emily was already at the 4th door when Pete's voice came through the earpiece. Sergeant was wearing thin and urgent and cutting through the controlled quiet of the corridor like a knife. Movement, north side. Vehicle just pulled up. Everything changed in 2 seconds. Jack held up his fist. The corridor froze. He moved to Sergeant, spoke directly into his ear. How many? Sergeant relayed, listened, relayed back. Pete says 2 got out of the vehicle, moving toward the north roll-up door. They have a schedule, Emily said low and fast. She turned from Sophia's door. I told you deliveries. I didn't know when. She checked something in her head, recalculated. It's a check-in. They do a check-in, not a delivery. I heard it once, but I didn't know the pattern. I'm sorry I didn't know. Don't, Jack said quietly. How long for a check-in? I don't know. I heard voices, then the door closing, then quiet. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. 10 minutes. Jack ran the numbers. 3 girls in the corridor, 1 still in a locked room, 2 unknowns at the north entrance. His team split between the corridor and the exterior. He looked at Sergeant. Get them to the trucks, he said, indicating the 3 women behind them. Quietly, now. And Sophia, Emily said. I've got Sophia, Jack said. Go. Emily looked at him. 3 heartbeats of pure conflict crossed her face, the 3 women behind her who needed to move, and the locked door 4 feet in front of her. Then she nodded and turned and spoke quickly to Priya and Destiny and Kara in a voice that was calm in the way that only costs something to produce. Follow this man. Do exactly what he says. Fast and quiet. Sergeant moved them out. 2 other men stayed with Jack. Jack looked at Sophia's door. The padlock on this one was different. He saw it immediately and his stomach tightened. Newer, heavier, hardened steel shackle, the kind that bolt cutters chewed at rather than cut through cleanly. "Where are the cutters?" he said. "Went out with Sergeant." Jack looked at the lock. He looked at the door. He made a decision. He knocked. 3 times, quiet but distinct. Silence from inside. He spoke low against the door, crack. "Sophia, my name is Jack. Emily sent me. Do you understand? Emily got out. She sent us back." Nothing, then so soft he almost missed it under the sound of rain on the roof. "Emily. She's outside. She's safe. I need you to stand back from the door." "Can you do that for me?" A pause. The sound of movement. "Okay," said the small voice. Jack stepped back and looked at his 2 men, and they hit the door together, not delicately, not quietly, but with the full, committed weight of people who have decided that speed now is worth sound, and the padlock hasp tore out of the old door frame on the second hit, and the door swung hard, and Jack went in fast. Sophia was in the corner, 17 years old. She'd done what he'd asked. She was pressed against the wall, not cowering, just giving him space, which told him something about her that mattered. But her color was wrong, and she was holding her left arm against her body at an angle that spoke of days of pain. And when she looked at him, her eyes were tracking slower than they should. "Can you walk?" Jack asked. "Yes," she said, the same word Priya had said, the same impossible, stubborn, essential yes. "Then we walk now." He put himself beside her, and she put her hand on his arm, and they moved. They were 8 feet from the North Corridor junction when the voices got loud. Not outside loud, inside loud. The north roll-up door had opened, and the 2 men from the vehicle were inside the building, and one of them was saying something in a tone that had gone from routine to alert in the space of a sentence, because the guard at the junction wasn't there, because Carlos wasn't answering his radio, because something in the geometry of the building was wrong in a way that a man in that line of work recognizes at a cellular level before his brain can articulate it. "Stop," Jack said. He put his arm out. The 3 of them, Jack, Sophia, and one of his men, stopped at the junction. The voices were getting closer. 30 feet. 25. Jack's man looked at him. Jack looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at Jack with the particular expression of a person who has been in danger long enough to recognize it in its many variations, and who is remarkably not panicking. "Down," Jack said. "Now, quiet." They went down, against the corridor wall. In the dark below, the sight line of anyone who came through the junction at eye level. The footsteps came to the junction, stopped. One of the men, Jack could hear his breathing, could almost feel his posture, the professional stillness of someone pointing a flashlight and a question mark at a space that should be occupied. Turned the beam left. Right. The edge of it swept over their position and missed by 4 feet, and Jack's entire body was a held breath. The other man said something in low urgent Spanish that Jack didn't need to translate, because tone is a language, and the tone said something is wrong. We need to check the rooms. They started moving down the corridor, toward the west wing, toward the open doors, toward the evidence of everything. Jack moved. He came up from the floor in one motion, fluid and completely silent, and he closed the distance between himself and the nearer man in 4 steps, and the takedown was fast and technical and final, in the way that things are final when a 60-year-old ex-Marine decides they're going to be final. The man went down. His radio clattered. The second man spun. He was faster than Jack expected, and he had his hand going to his waistband, and Jack's man came out of the dark on the left, and there was a collision of bodies, and something hit the floor hard, and for 3 seconds the corridor was pure chaos, the specific chaos of a physical confrontation in a dark space where nobody has enough information. And then it was quiet. Both men were on the floor. Jack straightened, checked his hands, checked his man, and he's okay. Checked Sophia, who had stayed exactly where he'd told her to stay, and was staring at him with wide eyes that held something beyond shock. "You're okay," he told her. "I know," she said, and she said it like she meant it, which was the thing about Sophia that Jack would remember later. Not that she'd been afraid, but that she'd decided not to be. He pulled out his phone. Texted Sergeant, one word, rolling. Sergeant's response came in 8 seconds, north clear. "Truck's warm." Jack looked at Sophia. "Let's go find Emily." Outside, the rain had gone cold and clean, in the kind of steady that washed everything. Sergeant had the 3 women at the trucks and was running a quiet, efficient head count when Jack came out the east door with Sophia and the weight that had been sitting in the corridor since they had entered the building started fractionally to shift. Priya saw Sophia and made a sound that wasn't words, just sound. The sound of relief so large it doesn't fit in language. She put her arms around the younger girl and Sophia leaned into it, and for a moment the two of them just stood there in the rain while the world reorganized itself around them. Emily was watching. She stood slightly apart from the group, and when Sophia came out, she closed her eyes for a brief second, just one, and Jack saw her lips move with something that might have been a prayer, or might have been a name, or might have been both. Then she opened her eyes and the calculation came back into them. That's 4, she said. All 4. All 4, Jack confirmed. Something crossed her face that had no single name. Not relief exactly. Relief was too simple for what had been carried, and what had been done, and what had been risked in the doing of it. It was more like the moment when a person stops bracing for impact and realizes slowly, disbelievingly, that the impact is not coming, that they are through it, that the other side exists and they are standing on it. Then Pete's voice cut through. Jack, his tone had changed. Not the operational low voice of the last 40 minutes. Something tighter. The SUV from the bar, it's moving. The whole team heard it. The organized calm of the extraction became something more alert, more compressed. Direction, Jack said. South on the highway, moving fast. Pete paused. Jack, it's not coming here. It's moving away, like they got a call. Sergeant and Jack looked at each other. Someone in that building had time to transmit, Sergeant said. Not an accusation, a fact. Before we got to them, Jack said, which means someone knows. The girls heard this. Priya looked up. Destiny's hand tightened on Emily's sleeve. Even Kara, steady, analytical Kara, who had walked out of that room like she was walking out of a business meeting, shifted her weight in a way that meant she understood exactly what it meant. Someone had sent a signal, and the SUV, instead of coming to the warehouse, was running, which meant whoever was in it wasn't coming to fight. They were going somewhere else, to something else, to someone else. Marcus, Emily said. Everyone looked at her. He's not running, she said, and her voice had gone very still in the way that preceded something bad. He's going to the detective. He's going to whoever he has inside. Because if this goes sideways, if those girls are out and they can talk, he needs his protection in place before anyone can build a case. The rain hit the roof of the truck above them, and Jack ran the logic, and it was clean and correct, and he hated it. We need to move, he said, all of us. Now. Move where, Destiny said. If the police are compromised. Not all of them, Jack said. He looked at Emily. You said you heard a name. You said detective. I heard a title, she corrected. I don't have a name. But it's one person, Jack said. One corrupt person in a department of hundreds. That's not a compromised department. That's a compromised individual. He watched her absorb this. There are people we can go to that Marcus can't reach before we do. But we have to move right now. Who? Emily asked. People who owe me a conversation, Jack said simply. It wasn't an answer. She knew it wasn't an answer, but the way he said it with the flat certainty of a man who has accounts with the world that predate anyone's understanding of them made it feel like enough. For right now in the rain, with 4 women wrapped in borrowed jackets and the clock running, it had to be enough. Trucks, Sergeant said. Everyone in, now. They moved. Sophia climbed in last, and as she did, she looked back at the building. One time, one single look, the way people look at places they are leaving, that they need to never see again but need to confirm, our real need to confirm they were actually there and are actually leaving, and then she got in the truck and closed the door and looked straight ahead. They were 20 seconds down the road when Pete said someone else was in that building. The truck went silent. What? Jack said. I've been running the count, Pete said from the back. He sounded like he didn't want to be saying this. The 2 men from the north entrance, the guard at the junction wall, Carlos outside, that's 4. Emily said 2 guards on rotation inside. He paused. I only counted 1 interior guard. The mask sat in the air of the truck like something with teeth. Where's the second one? Sergeant said. Nobody answered because nobody knew. And somewhere between the warehouse they were leaving and wherever they were going in the dark and the rain and the complicated geography of a night that had already delivered more than anyone had planned for, a 5th man was somewhere. Not zip-tied, not neutralized, not accounted for. Knowing what had just happened and free to tell someone about it. Emily looked at Jack. Jack looked at the road. His hands on the wheel were steady and his face was steady, And inside him, something old and experienced and tired was doing the only thing it knew how to do when a variable entered the equation without warning. It adapted. Drive faster, he said. Sergeant didn't argue. The truck accelerated into the dark, carrying 4 women who were breathing free air for the first time in days, and 12 men who had just crossed a line from which there was no uncrossing, and one missing body in the math. And somewhere ahead, the particular reckoning that comes when what you've done becomes known to people with the power to respond to it. The storm showed no sign of ending. Neither did the night. The drive back was 17 minutes of the longest silence any of them had ever sat inside. Not the silence of people with nothing to say. The silence of people with too much running through them. Too much that hadn't been processed yet. Too much that was still unresolved and pressing at the edges of everything. The 4 women sat wedged between bikers and trucks that smelled like rain and engine grease, and the bikers sat with their own particular version of the same overload, and nobody said anything unnecessary because there wasn't room for unnecessary anymore. Sophia fell asleep. Just like that, between 1 minute and the next, her head against the window out completely. Her body had been waiting for permission to shut down, and the moment she understood she was safe, it took it. Priya nursed, and carefully without waking her shifted, so Sophia's head could rest more comfortably against her shoulder instead of the glass. That small gesture, that instinctive, quiet human thing, nearly broke Decker, who was sitting across from them and who turned away and looked at the dark outside and worked his jaw for a moment before getting himself back together. Jack drove. Sergeant sat beside him, and the two of them had a conversation made entirely of silence, and the occasional glance, the kind of conversation that only happens between people who have known each other long enough to think in the same grammar. Emily sat directly behind Jack, and she was not sleeping and was not going to sleep, and what she was doing was thinking. Hard. Fast. The same way she'd thought in that locked room, not panicking, not spiraling, but working the problem. The missing 5th guard, the SUV running south, Marcus wherever he was right now doing the same thing Emily was doing, working the problem from the other side. She leaned forward. Jack? Yeah. The 5th man from the warehouse. If he transmitted before we got to the others, and Pete thinks he did, then Marcus already knows what happened. Not just that something went wrong. He knows the girls are out. I know, Jack said, which means he's not going to the detective to protect himself from a future investigation. He's going to activate something. He's going to move whatever assets he has that aren't burned yet. She paused. There are other girls, Jack, not just us 5. An operation that size with law enforcement cover, we weren't the first group, and we weren't going to be the last. The truck was very quiet. She's right, Sergeant said. He said it like a man who had hoped she wasn't. I know, Jack said again. And this time the weight in those 2 words was different, heavier, more specific. The weight of a man who has solved one problem and is watching a larger one materialize in its place. So what do we do? Emily said. Jack was quiet for a moment. The road ran under the truck. The rain ran down the windshield. We were always going to have to make a call after, he said. I just hoped we'd have more time before we had to make it. What call? Emily said. He didn't answer that yet. He picked up his phone and made a call of his own. Sit down. The person who answered on the 3rd ring had a voice like gravel and old coffee, and he answered with, Jack Cole calling me at this hour means someone's either dead or about to be. Neither, Jack said, but I need 20 minutes of your time, right now in person. A pause. Where are you, Terry? I'm heading toward Maricopa. Can you meet me at the old grain depot on Fullerton Road? You know the one. Jack. Ray. Jack's voice dropped to something quieter and more direct. I've got 4 women who are being trafficked out of a warehouse on the South County line. I've got the man who runs the operation still free and moving, and I have reason to believe someone with a badge is on his payroll. Another pause. Longer. I need someone I trust. You're the only one on that list with a federal ID. The silence on the other end had a particular quality. The quality of a man recalibrating everything he thought his night was going to be. 30 minutes, the voice said. 20, Jack said. Because we don't have 30. The call ended. Emily had heard every word. Who is that? She said. Ray Castillo, FBI retired, consults for the field office here on organized crime. Jack set the phone down. We were Marines together. Fallujah 2003. He owes me a conversation and a half. Will he help? He'll listen first, Jack said. That's all I'm asking for right now. After he listens, he'll decide. And if he decides no, Jack's hands were steady on the wheel. Then we figure out the next thing. But Ray Castillo has never in 40 years looked the other way from something he knew was real. That's either his greatest virtue or his worst problem, depending on who you ask. Emily sat back. She looked at Sophia sleeping against Priya's shoulder. She looked at Destiny, who was staring at her own hands in her lap like she was checking they were still there. She looked at Kara, who caught her eye and held it with the steady private acknowledgement of a person who understands that the thing that just happened to them is going to take a very long time to understand. Okay, Emily said. Ray Castillo. The grain depot had been closed for 9 years, and it showed. But it had a roof and 4 walls, and it was dark and off the road, and that was everything they needed right now. Jack pulled the trucks in and killed the engines, and for a moment everyone just sat with the sound of rain on old metal and the collective exhale of people who have been moving very fast and have just briefly stopped. Everybody out, Sergeant said. Stretch, stay close, nobody wanders. The women climbed out. Sophia woke when the truck stopped and looked around with the brief, wild confusion of someone waking in an unfamiliar place. And then the situation came back to her in a rush, and she was immediately completely alert, the particular hypervigilance that doesn't go away after 4 days, because 4 days is enough to rewire a person's relationship with safety. We're okay, Emily said, immediately moving to her side. We stopped. We're waiting for someone. Sophia looked at her. Marcus, no. Someone who's going to help. Emily paused. Someone Jack trusts. Sophia processed this. Looked at Jack, who was standing a few feet away, looking at his phone. Looked back at Emily. Do you trust him? Emily thought about that honestly for a moment, about a man who had caught her when she fell, who had gone back for Sophia, specifically, who had driven a truck into the dark armed with nothing but a napkin and a set of values he'd apparently decided were non-negotiable a long time ago. Yeah, she said. I do. Ray Castillo arrived in 19 minutes in a pickup that was 10 years old and unremarkable in the way that certain federal vehicles learn to be unremarkable. He was 62, built like a person who had been athletic once and had maintained it out of habit rather than vanity, and he walked into the depot with the unhurried stride of a man who has been in rooms that were worse than this and knows it. He looked at the 4 women, looked at the 12 bikers, looked at Jack. Tell me, he said. Jack told him. All of it uninterrupted in the same precise sequence he'd gotten it from Emily. When he finished, he gave Ray the napkin with Emily's diagram slightly damp but still readable. Ray looked at the napkin for a long time. Then he looked at Emily. You drew this from memory? Yes, she said. Guard rotations too. Everything I could observe from a locked room. Ray looked at her with the kind of evaluating attention that felt clinical at first and then resolved into something more like respect. What did you study? Communications, she said. Sophomore year. You should consider a different career, he said. Then he looked at Jack. The detective. You have nothing on him beyond what she heard through a door. Correct, Jack said. Which means if I open this through official channels, he knows the second his name comes up in any database query. And if he's as embedded as she thinks, he burns Marcus before we can get to either of them, Jack finished. Ray turns away, walked a few steps, stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and his back to the room in the posture of a man doing math that he doesn't love the answer to. The room waited. Sophia spoke, quiet but clear. There are other girls. Ray turned back. That's what Emily said, Sophia continued. We weren't the only ones. I heard Marcus on the phone on the 3rd night. He wasn't talking about us anymore. He was talking about the next group. He said, she stopped. Her jaw tightened. He said the product was already in transit. The word landed in the depot like a physical thing. Product. The deliberate administrative dehumanizing word for what they had been to this man. The word that told you everything you needed to know about the nature of the evil they were dealing with. Not passionate evil, not impulsive evil, but organized evil, bureaucratic evil with a spreadsheet. Ray closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he took out his own phone. I need to make 2 calls, he said, both to people I trust with my life, both outside local jurisdiction. Both calls happen right now, and then we move fast because you're correct that we don't have 30 minutes. He looked at Jack. You understand that I can't protect you from the legal exposure here. What you did tonight? I know what we did tonight, Jack said evenly. I need you to know that I know, Ray said. And I need you to know that it matters to me what you did, even if the law can't say so. Something passed between the two men. 40 years of history compressed into 4 seconds of eye contact. Make your calls, Jack said. The first call took 6 minutes. The second call took 4. Ray spoke in the controlled, telegraphic shorthand of someone who has spent decades having urgent conversations with people who know how to hear the real information underneath the official language. When he hung up after the second call, he turned back to the room and his face had the look of someone who is committed to a course of action and made peace with it. There's a task force, he said. Human trafficking, federal level. I know the lead agent. She's been working organized trafficking in the Southwest for 3 years, and she has been trying to find an active operation to break open. He looked at Emily, then at the other 3 women. You 4 are the break. And the detective, Jack asked. If he's in the system, she'll find him by running financial traces rather than name searches. It takes longer, but it doesn't trip the wire. Ray paused. She's 25 minutes out. She's coming here with 2 agents she personally vetted. And Marcus, Emily said, that's the harder part. Ray looked at her directly. He's running. The SUV that left the bar, we think we know what direction based on what you heard about his contacts. But think we know and have him are 2 different things. He'll change his appearance, Kara said. Everyone looked at her. She'd been quiet for so long the room had half forgotten she was building observations the entire time. He's done this before. He has a protocol for when an operation burns. He'll have a new identity ready. He'll have Tim. He'll have somewhere to go that isn't traceable. How do you know that? Ray said carefully. Kara looked at him. Because I was in the second meeting with Emily, the one with the contract. She paused. And before Marcus walked in, one of his assistants got a call she thought none of us could hear. She used the word protocol, and she was looking at a photo on her screen, a man who looked like Marcus but didn't. Same build, different hair, different face almost. A prepared alternate identity, Ray said. A prepared alternate life, Kara said. Somewhere already established. I don't know where, but it means if you don't get him in the next, she checked, something internal recalculated. I'd say 4 hours, maybe 5. You might not get him at all. The depot was extremely quiet. Ray looked at Jack. 4 hours. Then move faster, Jack said. The federal agent who arrived 23 minutes later was named Sandra Voss, and she came in like someone who has been preparing for exactly this moment for 3 years and is not going to waste a single breath of it. She was 40 sharp-faced with the kind of focused energy that doesn't register as aggressive until it needs to. And she went straight to the women first, before she spoke to anyone else, sat with them, spoke to them quietly, not debriefing, just making contact, just being a person before being an agent, which told Jack everything he needed to know about her. Then she stood and looked at Ray and said, "You were right about the task force. We have enough to open active warrants based on victim testimony alone. Everything else is corroboration." She looked at Emily's napkin, which Ray had given her on arrival. "This is remarkable." "She drew it from memory," Ray said. 4 days of observation. Voss looked at Emily. Emily looked back. "The warehouse, how long before Marcus's people could clear it?" "They know we hit it," Emily said. The 5th guard transmitted. "But clearing a warehouse of evidence that size..." She paused. "There are fixtures, installed locks, electrical modifications. You can remove the people and the portable things fast, but the physical infrastructure takes time." "How much time?" "I don't know for certain, but the way the place was built, it wasn't temporary. It was meant to run for a while. So my guess is they need more time to sanitize it than they have." Voss nodded once sharp. "We move on the warehouse in the next 30 minutes with my team and local units I personally cleared." Simultaneously, she looked at Ray. "We start the financial trace on the detective." "What about Marcus?" Jack said. Voss turned to him. She looked at him with the evaluating directness of someone who is deciding how honest to be. "Mr. Cole, what you and your people did tonight..." "Don't," Jack said. "Not hostile, just preemptive. Handle Marcus first. We can have the other conversation later." A beat. Then Voss said, "We have a bolo on the SUV. We have Marcus's photo going to every state and federal system in the next 10 minutes. And we have," she looked at Kara, "the information about a secondary identity, which is actually the most valuable thing in this room right now, because it means we're not looking for Marcus. We're looking for whoever he's about to become." "How does that help?" Destiny asked. She'd been quiet for so long her voice in the space startled several people. If you don't know who that is, we don't yet, Voss said, but he does. And the people who built that identity for him left fingerprints. That kind of document work, real IDs, real financials, a real established alternate life. You can't do that alone, and you can't do it without leaving traces in systems that my office knows how to read. She paused. He thinks he's running towards safety. He's actually running toward the thing that's going to locate him. The room absorbed this. Sophia, who had been listening from slightly apart, spoke. What about us? Voss turned to her. Immediately, completely. No delay. You go home, she said. Tonight, every one of you. I have people who will take you, not local police, federal transport. Your families have been looking for you. We've had 3 of the 4 of you on missing persons for the past 48 hours. She paused. We didn't know where to look. We do now. Sophia looked at Emily. Emily looked at Sophia. And between them passed something that had been built in the dark through a shared wall in 4 days of not knowing a particular bond that comes from surviving something together that you weren't supposed to survive, and that neither of them would ever fully explain to anyone who hadn't been in it. Okay, Sophia said quietly. Voss began moving her agents toward the door. The logistics of the night were accelerating now. The warehouse raid, the financial trace, the transport of the women, the warrant process, all of it, spinning up simultaneously with the controlled urgency of people who know that the window is real and finite. In the organized motion of the depot, Jack found himself briefly still. Emily found him. She stood beside him, and for a moment they didn't say anything. Just existed in the same space with the weight of the last several hours between them, like a physical thing. Outside, the rain was finally thinning, not stopping, just becoming less of itself, the storm working its way through. The task force, Emily said. Do you think they'll get Marcus Voss will, Jack said. She's got the look. What look? The look of someone who's been hunting something for long enough that they've stopped thinking about anything else. He paused. It's not entirely a healthy look, but it gets results. Emily almost smiled, then something shifted in her expression. The detective, if they find him, when, Jack said, when they find him, what happens to the cases he touched? The reports he made disappear. Jack looked at her. He thought about what Ray had said, that the legal exposure for what the vultures had done tonight was real, that he couldn't protect them from it, that the law couldn't officially acknowledge what they had done, even if the outcome was right. He thought about the particular injustice of that, of a system that could pursue the men who'd done this in a barn full of bikers, but couldn't give credit to the men who'd fixed it and might yet come for them anyway. That's a long road, he said honestly, and I can't tell you where it ends. But the girls are out, she said. The girls are out. She looked at him. Was it worth it for you and your people, knowing what you might face for this? Jack thought about his daughter, 18 years. The weight he'd been carrying since before some of these men were adults. The specific helplessness of knowing something happened and not being able to fix it because you were too far away and arrived too late, and the world didn't give you a second chance at it. Tonight it had given him the version of the second chance that life actually offers, which is never the one you wanted, but sometimes the one that matters. Yeah, he said, it was worth it. Emily nodded slowly. She believed him, not because it was comforting, but because she could see in his face that it was true. And true things have a quality that distinguishes them from performed ones if you've spent enough time paying attention. Jack, Ray's voice from across the depot. Voss needs the original diagram, and she needs you to walk one of her agents through the layout verbally. Jack straightened, looked at Emily once more. You good? I'm good, she said. And then quietly go. He went. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos of the best possible kind, the kind where everyone knows their job and the jobs are getting done, and the outcome is taking shape in real time. Voss's team moved on the warehouse and reported back in increments arrival entry, confirmation of infrastructure, confirmation of evidence, 4 arrests of individuals found on site. The warehouse hadn't been fully sanitized. The 5th guard, the one Pete had counted missing, had transmitted his warning and then apparently decided that loyalty had limits and had put 30 miles between himself and the operation rather than staying to clean it up. He'd be found. Voss said so with the flat certainty of someone who has found people like that before. The financial trace was running. Ray was on a call with someone at the Phoenix field office, speaking quietly urgently, the words coming in compressed bursts that sounded like a man who is dismantling something very carefully so it falls in the right direction. The four women were being prepared for transport. Federal SUVs, female agents, phone calls already made to families. Priya had talked to her mother for 4 minutes and come back to the group with a face that was completely wrecked and completely whole at the same time. Destiny had asked to call her roommate before her parents, which everyone had respected without comment. Kara had made one call that lasted 45 seconds and told no one who it was to. Sophia had asked to speak to Emily before she got in the vehicle. They stood apart from the group, the two of them, while the organized world moved and made noise around them, and Sophia looked at Emily with 17-year-old eyes that had been through something no 17-year-old's eyes should go through and said, "Will you be okay?" Emily looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Are you sure, Sophia?" "Because you did the thing," Sophia said. "You got out, and you came back, and you did the thing, and that is—" She stopped. Her voice was working against something. "I was in that room on the fourth night, and I really thought," she pressed her mouth tight. "I thought no one was coming, and I was trying to decide what that meant, whether I was going to let it mean what it felt like it meant." Emily reached out and put her hand on Sophia's arm. "Someone was always coming," she said. "I just had to find them." Sophia looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the particular finality of someone filing something away in themselves, not forgetting it, not dismissing it, but putting it somewhere it can be found later when it's needed. "Thank you," she said. Then she got in the vehicle, and the door closed, and the SUV pulled out of the depot into the thinning rain. Emily stood and watched it go. Behind her, Pete said quietly, "Jack, we got a problem." She turned. Pete was holding his phone, and his face had the look of someone delivering news he hadn't wanted to receive. "The SUV from the bar, they found it." "Where?" Jack said. "Scottsdale, abandoned in a parking structure." Pete paused. Marcus was already in the wind, but they found something in the vehicle. He looked at his phone. A cell phone, burner but not fully wiped. Ray's contact at the field office pulled the last outgoing call before it was ditched. The depot had gone very quiet. "Who did he call?" Ray said. Pete looked up. "Someone inside the FBI Phoenix field office." Nobody breathed. Not the detective, not local law enforcement, not the level anyone had been looking at. One level higher, one level deeper, one level that meant the trace Ray had been running for the last 40 minutes might have already been seen by the person it was looking for. Ray stood very still. His face did something complicated and then resolved into something harder. He looked at Jack. "Tell Voss to stop the financial trace," he said. "Right now, before another query goes through." Jack was already moving toward Voss. Emily stood in the center of the depot and looked at the space where the SUVs had been, where four women were now moving through the night toward their families, and she felt the ground shift under this thing they'd built tonight. Not collapse, not crumble, but shift. Remind them that it wasn't over, that the thing they were fighting had roots they hadn't fully mapped yet, and that some of those roots went deeper than anyone in this building had understood 40 minutes ago. She thought about something Jack had said in the bar hours in a lifetime ago. "We don't walk away from this." She looked at Ray, who was already on a different phone making a different call in a different voice. She looked at Jack crossing the depot floor with the specific urgency of a man adapting to a new variable without breaking stride. She looked at Sergeant, who had heard everything and was already quietly repositioning the remaining bikers without being asked, tightening the perimeter, adjusting the geometry of the room because some part of him had never fully stood down. She was 20 years old and she had been in a locked room 4 days ago. And now she was standing in the middle of something that was bigger than anyone had planned for and more dangerous than anyone had said out loud yet. And she was still standing. That wasn't nothing. That was in fact the entire thing. She breathed. She found her feet. She waited for Jack to come back and tell her what came next. The storm outside was almost through, but the night, the real night, the one they were all living inside, had one more turn in it yet. Ray moved like a man half his age when the stakes clarified. The moment Jack relayed the information, FBI Phoenix field office, someone inside the financial trace potentially already compromised. Ray was on a different phone making a different call before the words were fully out of Jack's mouth. Not panicked, the opposite of panicked. The kind of focused velocity that comes from a person who has been in this exact category of situation before and knows that the next 90 seconds matter more than the next 90 minutes. Get Voss, Ray said over his shoulder to Jack, not breaking the call. Tell her to pull the trace offline, everything. Close the queries, don't save the logs, and don't run another search through the Phoenix field office system until I tell her it's clear. Jack crossed the depot in 10 steps. Voss heard the first 4 words and was already on her own phone before he finished the sentence. She had the look of someone who had suspected something like this was possible and had been hoping to be wrong and was now doing the very fast, very focused work of a person who is no longer hoping. Emily stood in the center of it all and watched the room reorganize itself around a new threat with the particular efficiency of people who are very good at being in trouble. The bikers tightened without being told. Sergeant moved to the depot entrance and stood there with the patient, immovable quality of a man who is a door when he needs to be. Young Pete had his phone up, running something monitoring the highway approaches, Emily realized, making sure nothing was coming toward them that shouldn't be. She should have felt more afraid. She was aware of that on some level, that the rational response to learning the corruption went higher than anyone thought went. Federal went into the office of the woman, currently standing 15 feet away, trying to contain the damage was fear. Maybe collapse. Maybe the particular despair of a person who has fought hard for solid ground and felt it dissolve under them again. She didn't feel that. What she felt was cold, clean. The same thing she'd felt on the 4th day in that locked room when she'd stopped crying and started counting footsteps. The place past fear where the brain stops producing emotion and starts producing solutions. She walked to Ray. He was still on the call, but he saw her coming and his eyes said, "What?" She held up one finger. "One question," he said into the phone. "Hold," and looked at her. "The person inside the field office," she said. "They got Marcus's call before he ditched the burner, which means they know the operation is burned. They know the warehouse was hit. They know we exist." She paused. "But they don't know where we are right now." Ray looked at her. "Which means the window isn't closed," she said. "It's just narrower." Ray held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then he said into the phone, "You heard that?" A pause. "Yeah, she's right." Another pause longer. "Then do it that way, 15 minutes. He hung up. "Who was that?" Jack said from behind Emily. "Inspector General's office," Ray said. "Federal, completely outside the Phoenix field office chain of command. They have their own investigative authority and their own systems that don't cross-reference with field office databases." He looked at Voss, who had just gotten off her own call and was crossing toward them. "It's the cleanest move, slower in some ways, but the mole can't see it coming because it doesn't touch any system he has access to." Voss stopped in front of them. She looked at Ray, then at Emily, then at Jack. "The IG's office," she said. "It wasn't a question. You already called them." 30 seconds ago. Something moved across Voss's face, not offense exactly, but the very brief flash of a person recalibrating who is actually running the situation. Then it cleared. "Good," she said simply. "That's the right call." She looked at Emily. "You suggested it." "Logic suggested it," Emily said. Voss almost smiled. "We're going to need your full formal statement, all of you, tonight before anything gets colder." She looked at the group, the 4 bikers who remained: Jack, Sergeant, Ray, Emily. "I know that creates complications for some people in this room." "Do what you need to do," Jack said. "Jack," Sergeant started. "Do what you need to do," Jack repeated, looking at Voss, not blinking, not hedging, the full weight of a man who has made his peace with the cost of the thing and is not going to flinch at the invoice. Sergeant closed his mouth. He looked at Jack for a long moment with the expression of a man who disagrees and respects the decision at the same time, which is the hardest combination a person can hold. "Statements first," Voss said. "Everything else after. And I mean everything." Bam. The statements took 2 hours, not in the depot. Voss moved them to a cleared location, a federal satellite office in Chandler, that she'd used for sensitive operations before, staffed only by the 2 agents she'd brought, and 1 additional person she called in personally. No Phoenix field office personnel, no local law enforcement. The chain of custody for every piece of information collected that night ran directly to the IG's office and nowhere else. Emily went first. She sat across a table from a female agent named Torres, who had kind eyes and a very precise way of asking questions, and Emily talked for 47 minutes without stopping. She told it in sequence. She didn't embellish and she didn't minimize. And she didn't skip the parts where she'd been afraid or the parts where she'd made decisions she wasn't sure were right. She told it like she'd told Jack in the back room of the bar, with the precision of someone who understood that details were not decoration, they were evidence. When she finished, Torres set down her pen and looked at her for a moment. "You have an extraordinary memory," Torres said. "I had a reason to use it," Emily said. Torres nodded slowly. "Is there anything else? Anything you haven't said yet because it felt too small or uncertain?" Emily thought. And something came to her, the thing she'd almost mentioned to Jack in the truck and had held back because she hadn't been sure it was real. "The night of the second day," she said, "Marcus made the call to the detective, but before that call, he made a different one. I only caught part of it. He said, and I'm quoting as exactly as I can, he said, 'The intake is on schedule. 3 from the agency, 2 from the university pipeline.'" Torres's pen came back down. University pipeline. That's the word he used, pipeline. Emily looked at her steadily. "There's a recruitment structure inside at least one university. I don't know which one. I don't know how embedded it is. But it wasn't improvised the way he said it. It was a system." The room was very quiet. "That goes in the report," Torres said, "not bureaucratically, with the weight of someone who understands what that means for the scope of what they're investigating." "It needs to," Emily said. Jack's statement took 35 minutes. He was precise in a different way from Emily, the precision of a man who knows legal exposure when he sees it and is not going to hide from it, but is also not going to provide more ammunition than the truth strictly requires. He told what happened. He told why. He did not apologize, and he did not perform remorse, and he did not try to make himself sound like anything other than what he was, a man who had made a decision and was standing in front of it. When he was done, the agent interviewing him, not Torres, an older man named Briggs, who looked like he'd been doing this since the Clinton administration, leaned back and looked at him for a long moment. "You understand," Briggs said carefully, "that the actions taken at the warehouse tonight—" "I understand," Jack said. "The DA's office." "I understand," Jack said again. Same tone, same weight. "Is there anything else you need from me for the record?" Briggs studied him. "You're not afraid of this." "I didn't say that," Jack said. "I said I understand it." He paused. "There's a difference." Briggs looked at him for another long moment and then made a note on his pad that Jack couldn't read and that he didn't ask about. At 4:17 in the morning, Ray found Jack in the hallway outside the statement rooms. Jack was leaning against the wall with a paper cup of bad coffee that he was drinking anyway. And he looked like a man who has spent everything he had and is still standing because standing is what comes next. Ray stood beside him. They were quiet for a moment in the way they'd been quiet before the grammar that only works between people who have known each other through enough hard things. "The IG's office confirmed," Ray said. "They have enough from the burner phone metadata to open an investigation into the field office contact. They're not announcing it. They're not logging it through normal channels. It's a sealed track." "Will it hold?" Jack said. "If Marcus is found and flipped, it will hold. The IG will have corroboration from 2 directions." Ray paused. "If Marcus disappears clean, then it depends on what else they find." "Yes." Jack drank his coffee. "What are the odds?" Ray was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, I'd have said 40%. Tonight changed some things." He glanced at Jack. "Emily's testimony on the university pipeline opens an investigative thread that was never on anyone's map before. That's a significant lead. That kind of structural intelligence." He stopped. "It's the kind of thing that unravels an operation from the inside rather than the outside. It takes time, but it's more thorough." "How much time?" "Months, possibly a year." Jack absorbed this. A year was not tonight. A year was the opposite of tonight. Slow procedural fought in rooms with fluorescent lighting and filing deadlines. A year was the kind of battlefield where the enemy's resources mattered more than anyone's courage. "But it moves," Ray said. "I'll make sure it moves." Jack looked at him. "You're staying on it." "Jack," Ray turned to face him. "I've been in federal law enforcement in one capacity or another for 38 years. I have personally witnessed situations like tonight handled the wrong way. I have watched things get buried. I have watched people in power protect each other and call it procedure." His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something old and tired, and still, after everything, genuinely angry. "Not this time. Not if I have anything to say about it." Jack held his gaze. "Then say it." "I intend to." They stood in the hallway together for another moment, the two of them 60 years old and 62 years old men who had lived long enough to stop being surprised by human evil, but who had apparently not lived long enough to stop being willing to fight it. That was something. Jack thought so anyway. Emily was in a side room when Jack found her sitting in a chair with her knees pulled up and a blanket someone had found around her shoulders and her eyes open and fixed on the middle distance. She wasn't sleeping and she wasn't crying. She was doing the thing she did, processing, running the night through herself and filing it into the shape it would have to take to be carried. She heard him come in and looked up. Torres needs one more thing, Jack said. Small, just a signature on the formal statement. I know, I'll do it in a minute. She looked at him. How are your people? The question surprised him. He paused in the doorway. My people. The 12 men who went to that warehouse, she said, who are going to have to deal with whatever comes next, legally, professionally, all of it. How are they? Jack thought about it honestly. They're good, he said. I don't mean fine, I mean good. The way a person is good after they've done something that cost them, but that they do again. Emily nodded slowly. And you, he looked at her, 20 years old in a borrowed blanket in a federal satellite office at 4 a.m, asking a 60-year-old man how he was doing with the same direct, unhesitating care she'd applied to everything else tonight. I'm good, he said, and he meant it the same way his men meant it. She studied his face the way she'd been studying everything all night, carefully, fully, not looking for what she wanted to see, but for what was actually there. Then she nodded, accepting it as true. Jack, she paused, your daughter. The word hit him in the chest the way it always did, clean and hard and unavoidable. I didn't tell anyone about her, he said. You figured it out. The way you moved in that warehouse, she said. The way you went to Sophia's door, specifically. The way you've been in this entire night. She held his gaze. A man who's just doing the right thing moves differently from a man who's been waiting to do it for a long time. Jack said nothing for a moment. He looked at the floor and then back at her. Her name was Claire, he said. It was the first time he'd said her name out loud to someone outside the club in a very long time. She was 22. She disappeared in 2007. We looked for her. He stopped, breathed. We never found her. Emily was very still. I don't know if she was, he stopped again. I've never known for certain, but over the years, the things I've learned about how these operations work, the timing, the geography. His jaw was tight. I have a theory. I've lived inside that theory for 18 years. I'm sorry, Emily said, quietly, fully, not as a formality, as a true thing delivered with both hands. Jack nodded once. Then tonight mattered twice, she said. He looked at her. For those 4 girls, she said, and for Claire. Because what happened tonight, what your people did, what Ray is doing, what Voss is building, it makes it harder for this to happen to the next Claire. That's not nothing. That's not small. She paused. That's actually the whole thing. Jack looked at this 20-year-old woman. This woman who had been zip-tied in a dark room 4 days ago and had come out of it with her mind intact and her moral clarity intact and her capacity for other people's pain, completely stubbornly intact. And he felt something loosen in him that had been held very tight for a very long time. Not grief releasing. Grief didn't release, but something around it. Something that had been bracing against the grief so long it had forgotten it was separate from it. You should call your mother, he said. Emily blinked. Then something crossed her face, the first fully unguarded thing he'd seen from her all night. A flash of the 20-year-old underneath all the precision and the courage. Yeah, she said. Her voice was slightly different. I should. Torres can wait 5 minutes. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she reached into the pocket of the borrowed jacket, his jacket she realized suddenly, the one someone had put around her in the bar hours ago, and took out a phone that Voss's team had returned to her, and she called her mother. Jack stepped out of the room to give her privacy. He stood in the hallway and he heard through the door the moment Emily's mother answered. He didn't hear the words, just the sound of a voice that had been waiting by a phone for 4 days, hitting the voice of the person it had been waiting for, and the particular quality of relief that makes no distinction between crying and laughing, because at that level of feeling, the body doesn't bother. He stood in the hallway and he let himself hear it. By 6 a.m, the IG investigation was formally opened under seal. By 6:15, Voss had confirmation that the warehouse sweep had yielded 43 distinct pieces of physical evidence and 3 individuals in custody. By 6:40, Ray received a text from a contact in Tucson that read only package located, confirmed ID, in custody. He forwarded it to Jack without comment. Marcus had been found at a private airfield outside Tucson, 40 minutes from boarding a flight under a name that wasn't his. The secondary identity Kara had flagged had been exactly right. Different name, different hair, same eyes, same hands, same man. The IG investigators had cross-referenced the alias through financial systems the Phoenix field office had no visibility into, and the thread had led cleanly and directly to a man sitting in a departure lounge thinking he was free. I was not free. The field office contacted a senior analyst named Graves who had been on Marcus's payroll for 6 years and who had successfully buried 4 separate missing persons reports that might have broken the operation open earlier, was placed under investigation by 7 a.m. and suspended by 7:15. None of this was public. None of it would be public for a long time. The machinery of it was slow and careful and deliberate, and it would be months before any of it resolved into headlines or courtrooms or the kind of accountability that looked satisfying on the outside. But it was moving, and the people who set it moving were already gone. The iron vultures left the federal satellite office the way they'd left the warehouse, quietly in sequence without ceremony. Voss shook Jack's hand at the door. She held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. "What happens to your club now?" she asked. "Same thing that was always going to happen," Jack said. "We go back to our lives." "And the legal exposure is what it is," he said. "We knew that going in." Voss looked at him. Then she said, "For the record, and this is off the record, which I recognize is a contradiction, the testimony from those 4 women is going to do more for this investigation than anything my office has built in 3 years. That testimony exists because of what you did tonight." She paused. "I can't say that officially, but I needed to say it." Jack nodded. Appreciated. He walked out into the morning. The storm was completely finished. The desert air after a hard rain has a particular quality, scrubbed clean, sharp, carrying the smell of wet creosote and something that is either the earth breathing or just a person choosing to believe the earth breathes. The sun wasn't fully up yet, but the sky was that specific shade of deep blue that exists for about 15 minutes before the light takes over, when everything looks like it was just decided. His men were at the trucks. Emily was standing slightly apart near the edge of the parking area looking at the sky with the expression of someone reacquainting themselves with it. He walked to her. She heard him coming and turned. "Your ride is here," he said. One of Voss's agents was waiting to take her to her mother, who had driven through the night from Flagstaff and was currently parked outside a Denny's 2 miles from the satellite office, and had called Torres 4 times in the last hour to confirm Emily was actually coming. Emily looked at him. In the early morning light, she looked her age, young, tired, carrying something large, and also ageless in the way that people look ageless when they've been through something that stripped everything unnecessary off of them. "What do I tell people?" she said. "About tonight, about you and your people." "Tell them the truth," Jack said. "That's all you ever need to do. And if they ask who helped me," he almost smiled, "tell them it was nobody important, just some guys who were in the right place." Emily looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at everything all night, fully without flinching, without the protective layer of distance that most people keep between themselves and what's real. "You know what I'm going to be," she said. "Broadcast journalism. That's what I was studying." She paused. "I'm going to tell this story, not now, when it's safe, when the investigation is resolved and the names can be said and the thing can be seen for what it was." She held his gaze. "I'm going to tell it so it doesn't happen to the next girl. I'm going to tell it so that people understand what that operation was and how it worked and what it takes to survive it." Jack looked at her. "And us, the club. I'll tell what's true," she said simply. "That 40 men sat in a bar and heard something real and chose to do something about it. That nobody who was actually dangerous that night was wearing a vest." She paused. "That danger and protection are not the same thing, and the world gets them confused." Jack said nothing for a moment. He thought about Claire. He thought about 18 years. He thought about the specific shape of a grief that had lived in him so long. It had become part of his architecture, inseparable from the walls. He thought about a warehouse door opening in the dark, about Sophia's voice through a locked door saying, "Okay, About 4 women being driven home through the beginning of a morning their families hadn't known they'd see. I thought about this young woman in front of him who had run barefoot through a rainstorm and crashed through a door and changed everything. You didn't just survive, he said quietly. You brought them back. Emily held his gaze. And something in her face, the last of whatever had been bracing, whatever had been held tight since the moment she'd woken in that dark room and decided she was going to pay attention and get out and come back, let go. Not weakness, the opposite. The release of a person who has carried something to where it needed to go and can now stand at full height without it. Go find your mother, Jack said. She went. He watched the car pull out of the lot and turn onto the road. He watched it until it was out of sight. Then he turned back to his men who were standing by the trucks in the early morning light, tired and present, and entirely themselves, 40 men. The world had decided were dangerous, who had spent one night reminding the world what danger was actually for. Let's go home, Jack said. They went. And in the place the world calls dangerous, in the margins, in the edges, and the spaces between the systems that were supposed to protect people, and sometimes didn't, something had happened that no headline would capture cleanly, and no courtroom would fully honor, and no official record would tell with the right weight. 4 women went home. 1 man was in custody. 1 corrupt official was under investigation. 1 operation that had been running in the dark was burning in the light. And a 60-year-old man with a white patch that said Reaper drove back through the desert in the early morning carrying 18 years of grief and something new beside it. Not peace, exactly, but the closest thing to it that a man like Jack Cole was ever going to find. Which was enough. That was enough.